you start visualizing how a 4-motor system works. Coming in, a little lift off oversteer. Feel the weight of the car, of course, but these tires also don't help with response time. So from steering tip in to actual vehicle movement is a little bit slower than you would get on the 22s, but you know, 22s are definitely optimized a little bit better for this truck. I have it in stiff right now. If it were up to me, I'd actually run this probably in soft and up one suspension height, because over these bumps, it's actually almost like the tires coming off the road a little bit. But look at that transition. That's what the low center of mass will really do for you. Hello and welcome to another Out of Spec Reviews video. Welcome to the inside of the Rivian R1S, and welcome to my favorite videos to make. This is the nerdy deep dive driving impression video of the Rivian R1S. Now, we've done a lot with this vehicle already. I've seen how far it goes on a charge. I've seen the spread of efficiency from 60, 70, and 80 miles an hour. We've put a whole family in it. We've put dogs in it. After this video, I'm going to be towing with it. There's a lot that we're figuring out. But this one, to me, is the most important because, yeah, I like to know how cars drive. And sometimes it takes an hour for me to explain that to you. And I think it's important that we, A, compare this to the Rivian R1T, which either some of you own or have on reservation or are familiar with the driving dynamics. But I would say most importantly is that we compare it to other electric SUVs on the market, such as Audi e-tron, BMW iX, Mercedes EQS SUV, and so on and so forth, because to me, those are the real competition to this. Honestly, also factoring in, I just have been driving the new Range Rover, this is like the ultimate competitor to that vehicle. So I'm going to make a lot of comparisons in this video, but for now, let's get into how the Rivian R1S drives in the city, on the highway, and of course, shredding up in the canyons. I want to say a huge thank you to Magna for sponsoring this video. Guys, every week I thought it'd be pretty cool to highlight a specific Magna innovation, and in this case I want to talk about seats. Now, seats may not sound that interesting, but Magna's actually developed a really cool technology called Freeform. Now, traditionally seat covers need to be stitched and sewed and hooked and looped in certain places whenever you want to tie down the material or have some sort of concave surface. But with a new innovation called Freeform, the material itself can actually be molded to whatever shape you'd like. For example, take a look at this diamond pattern. When have you ever seen a fully embossed diamond pattern with no stitching? It's crazy. It's going to lead to the next generation of interior materials. I've actually even had a chance to try this out. And what's even crazier is the seat structure was the same as the factory OE spec. Freeform allowed the entire seat to feel and mold differently than the original seat. It was really crazy. Take a look at my reaction here. Let's see how this all... Okay, totally different, first of all. But it's the same seat structure.
It's the guts of the seat the production seat.
Whoa, totally different. So a huge thank you to Magna for sponsoring this video. We'll have a full in-depth video with Magna seating specifically on Freeform coming to this channel very soon. I'm really looking forward to sharing that with you. So starting first, we're going to go on the morning run to Starbucks because that's how I use my vehicle. I own a Rivian R1T, so I needed the 4-motor, crazy off-road capable vehicle to get me to Starbucks every morning. But I think it's important before we do that just to tell you a little bit about the spec on this vehicle, because that plays a lot into how it drives and some other things. So it's the Rivian R1S, which is a much shorter wheelbase, somewhere in between 12 and 14 inches shorter than the Rivian R1T. And I can already tell you, yes, there's a major driving difference between the two. However, if you just have one, you'll basically get the same experience. But if you get out of one and into the other, you'll be like, oh, whoa, okay, this is different. And mostly from a handling perspective. From drivetrain inputs and everything, it's all the same. The next thing is this has a 135 kilowatt hour battery pack. It's the large battery. It's the largest battery you can get in the Rivian R1S. I did a range test on this and got about 290 miles on a charge. I think it was 288 plus or minus at 70 miles an hour. That's pretty good, but not huge range. However, I've been towing with my truck and the charging stations have been spaced fine. So I would say the range is more than acceptable. I wouldn't need any more because my cutoff is really 250 miles of real world range, no matter how I drive it, or more, and I'm pretty good. And this is kind of there. One thing Rivian does recommend is a 70% daily charging limit. So we're at that right now, and the truck is predicting 206 miles at 70%. How often are you going to drive more than 200 miles a day? I don't know. I charge my truck to 70%, and very rarely do I go over that. But if I'm towing, I'll go all the way up to 100 if I need the range, or most often I'll push it up to 85%. Those are the three options: 70, 85, and 100% for your daily max charging limits. So, you know, around town mode, I'll walk you through some of the settings that we have, but there's your battery pack. I've been able to pull 124.5 kilowatt hours out of this battery pack, according to the software, before it pretty much shut off on me. So that's the usable component. And then there's that 10 kilowatt hour buffer or so. I'm not sure if it's up top or bottom. My guess is most of it is up top on the pack. Cool. So I think before we even start moving, it's important to tell you, well, I guess I should tell you the wheels. We're on the 20-inch black wheels, which are on the Pirelli Scorpion all-terrain tires. It's a Rivian specific tire. It's an OE tire, you know, Rivian specific, and it's got the foam on the inside. So for an all-terrain tire, the noise performance is very good. It is quieter if you go with the 21 or 22-inch wheel options, but not by much. I would say don't let noise impact your wheel and tire factor. The wheel and tire I would actually choose for Rivian R1S are the 22s. I think they look the best, and honestly, most people aren't going hardcore rock crawling all the time, and I do with my truck with the 22s, and maybe I got a couple little scratches here and there, but like, as long as you place the wheels properly, you're fine with the 22s for 90% of wheeling. Now, if you're here in Colorado and want to go on trails all the time, yeah, maybe go for the 20s. It's a really good wheel option. It's a forged wheel. I'm a big fan of the 20-inch wheel, but they are very popular, at least in my area, and I don't see enough 22s. What I've done on my truck is put all-terrain tires on my 22-inch wheels, and just because Nokian started making some tires for Rivians, and I thought that worked out pretty well. They were amazing on the trail, better grip than these actually. And I think, you know, what I'll probably end up doing is getting a dedicated set of 22 or 20-inch all-terrain wheels and tires, whether it's aftermarket through Martian Wheels in the future, or it's one of the Rivian factory options with that forged wheel. So this one, again, large battery, 4-motor, quad motor version is the only one they're making now, and the 20-inch all-terrain wheel and tire package. So this is really off-road spec. It has the skid plate. This is as hardcore off-road as you can spec a Rivian R1S. I already have a full off-road review on our out-of-spec overlanding channel where I compared this against R1T, talked about motor calibration. Perhaps I'll touch on that a little bit more as well in this video, but at least for the around city portion, we're not going to get super nerdy about that. I just kind of want to tell you how it drives in the city, how it drives on the highway, and then of course the Canyon, the performance section, is when we're really going to dive into honestly the weaknesses, the pros and cons, I guess, of the 4-motor system versus a traditional 2-motor system that can use brake-based torque vectoring, or even with an active torque vectoring component. So we are currently in park in kneel mode. Every time you put these vehicles in park, they sit down as a setting. I keep it off in my personal vehicle. To me, it feels like, okay, we're running the air compressor so much, the truck's going up and down, just wear components, and obviously we're keeping our truck forever, so it's in the permanent collection, so I just want to extend its life. But I have been using it on this review truck, and I have noticed no suspension binding going up and down, so they did a really good job. I would say it's not that big of a deal. Just to indicate, when you get in the vehicle in kneel mode and you put it in drive, it doesn't immediately raise. You have to get some speed on, and I'm looking here at this kneel button screen, I should say. What is this indicator on the screen? So at about 5 miles an hour, now we're going back up to standard height, and it raises pretty quickly. So now we're already there at standard height. Does like a fast raise every time the air compressor kicks on. I don't know if you can hear that. It is the loudest air compressor of any vehicle I've ever been in, and it's very overactive. Anytime you do anything with the air compressor in this vehicle, and it's at this perfect resonance that it actually shakes the driver's seat. Now, to be fair, I had another R1S owner. This is a review truck from Rivian. This is not mine, obviously. I had an R1S owner that I met at a Rivian meetup come in the car with me, and I was like, does your truck make this noise? And he said, nope, absolutely not. It's not nearly as loud. Now, on my R1T, it's much quieter than this as well. I just think on the R1S, the placement in the cab, maybe because this is an early VIN, this is VIN 140, it's just really annoying, actually. I wouldn't say it's a deal breaker, but it's like, okay, why does it gotta be so loud all the time? And I'm just getting us back into position because I'm waiting for it to shut off because it doesn't stop running. So we'll just wait here, and then I'll show you how the kneel mode function drops us down. So there, it just shut off. I'm going to go into park. You can see it's going to kneel. I can press this button to cancel anytime. So now we've aired all the way out, and we've basically gone to the lowest suspension height for ease of entry and exit. Pretty good setting. Let's go back to drive and let's drive it. The controls, very similar to Tesla, very similar to R1T. I'm not going to make so many R1T comparisons here because a lot of people ordering an R1S may not have a lot of R1T experience, but I will say, just right off the bat, the experience of getting in the vehicle and driving across town, in terms of inputs at least, is no different from the truck. So you put it in drive here, it's very nice, and all is pretty good. It has a wonderful seating position, a great steering wheel. Huge fan of sitting in here. The best way I can describe it is a very Range Rover-like commanding view of the road. You can see everything. No huge blind spots around the vehicle as well. Big glass everywhere. I love sitting in the R1S. To me, it's one of the best driving positions and experiences you can buy on the market today, regardless of price. It just works. And at least here in Colorado, certainly it's a premium vehicle. This thing's almost $100,000, but it's not pretentious. It's kind of cool because it's off-roady. You didn't really buy it to show off. I think, everyone looking at this vehicle, I guess the reason I say that is like, wow, that's so cool. It's an R1S. It gets a lot more looks than the truck because it's newer, and we have trucks all over town now. They're very popular here in northern Colorado. And, everyone's like, whoa, R1S, super cool. No one's gone like, wow, look at this dude who bought a $100,000 truck cruising around like you would look at someone who bought a pimped out Range Rover. So it has a good image. It's the right image for cruising around town. It's a bit adventurous. It's honest. It's really cool. Now, I'm a huge fan of the wood trim on the inside. I know that's going away, and that's for another topic for another day, but I love the way these things are kitted out. Personally, my spec would probably be limestone on Ocean Coast. In case you're wondering, that would probably be number one. Number two would be fully blacked out on the outside, 22-inch black wheels, and Ocean Coast interior, and then maybe Forest Edge exterior, forest green with the Ocean Coast interior. I'm a big fan of the light color interiors. You guys know that from my own personal car choices. So let's talk about driving it, which is honestly the best part of this vehicle. Driving the R1S improves your day. At least it improves mine. And part of that is because anytime I want the vehicle to do something, it is doing exactly what I'm asking for, or at least giving me the impression that it's trying its hardest to do what I'm asking for. And to me, that's a really commanding feeling. That's a great feeling of, wow, instant response to inputs and everything feels great. So let me walk you through what that actually means. From a throttle pedal standpoint, which to me is very important when we get into one pedal driving characteristics, and just really for any electric car, throttle is so important. I'm just going to pull over here to demonstrate this. By the way, I'm in full key up settings. This is normal all-purpose mode, and I'll go into what settings in a little bit. There are two different regen strengths. It goes from really strong to crazy strong, and they call it from standard to high. I drive the vehicle in high regen almost all of the time because I want as much deceleration when I come off the accelerator pedal. And I only like one pedal driving when it's calibrated nicely, and Rivian has done an incredible job. The only thing better than Rivian would be Tesla, but this has much stronger regen than any Tesla I've ever driven. Again, I own two Teslas. I love them because of their drivetrain calibration, and here it's really wonderful. So let me inch forwards. I'm just tipping into the throttle, and then I'm going to give you an impression of what regen does when I lift completely off. 10 miles an hour or so, fully off. Big dive under regen, slowly lets off, comes to a stop, and there we go. Now we're in auto hold. So it does a little bit of friction blending at the end. The pedal does pull away from you, just like a Tesla, just like Mercedes EQS, although that does it at speed, which is weird. And so, you know, the last couple miles an hour, the pedal moves away, it locks in, it holds you on the brakes. You cannot tell when it transitions from regen to friction brakes. Also a benefit is this vehicle has 4 permanent magnet motors that can pull you all the way down to pretty much a stop. You know, induction motors can't really do that. So this has, you know, magnetic force all the way to 0, which is great. The accelerator pedal, I can just roll into it and there's just more and more and more and more and more power the harder I go. And it's a really, I would say, linear throttle application. One thing I wish wasn't the case is when you go hard throttle, at least, I wish the pedal length was actually shortened by about 2 inches, maybe 1.5 inches. I find to go full throttle, I'm really reaching all the way forwards, and I don't really like how I'll use the term springy the accelerator pedal is. To me, it's a little bit of a weak pedal. I would like some more firmness. You know, think German accelerator pedal. It's also a top hinged pedal. I'm a bottom hinged pedal fan personally, but a top hinged accelerator pedal, a little bit springy, but certainly you can modulate it and get really good control out of it, no problem. So in terms of just accelerating and decelerating, you never have to use the brake pedal in typical driving. The brake is there really for emergency stopping or just to maybe brush speed off 5–10% more than regen's giving you if you really need to stop quickly. Most of the time you're stopping, you actually are still holding your foot on the accelerator pedal, just backed off a little bit to have a nice gradual deceleration. This car is truly one pedal experience, which is a wonderful thing. I'm a huge fan of the pedal inputs in this vehicle, but it does take a little bit of getting used to, especially if you're coming from a combustion vehicle. So what I'm going to do is just gently accelerate away from the light when it goes green. I'm going to show you, you can hear a little bit of the motor noise. It's not a bad noise, but there's definitely sound coming through from the drivetrain. And in my impression, that actually fits with the character of the R1S. It's pretty cool. So take a listen. So you just get this nice high-pitched whine. I think the front and rear gear ratios are very close. I don't know if they're identical or just off a little bit, because sometimes you get this warble effect, but I think it's a really positive thing in this vehicle. Again, it's not pitching to be the most luxurious electric vehicle with massaging seats like a Lucid Air or like a Mercedes EQS SUV. You know, in those vehicles, I praise quietness. I thought the Lucid had way too loud of a motor for their intended audience. For this vehicle, yeah, really, really good levels of noise. That's funny. The Nissan Leaf is our parking ticket enforcement vehicle. Can you imagine a more parking ticket enforcement vehicle than a Nissan Leaf? I mean, it works pretty well, but like, that just fits the character of the car. What I'm going to do now is give you a hard acceleration so you can really hear the in-cabin noise. Ready? Just sounds awesome. Okay, back to just cruising around an urban environment, which is what we're doing. You don't typically drive it that hard. I typically don't. The way I drive this vehicle is in the key up setting, which is the all-purpose drive mode. There's a few different ones. I'll walk you through them later on in the video. So I go all-purpose with the ride height in standard. I turn auto ride height leveling off. The thing is, anytime you come off of standard ride height, whether you go to low or high or lowest or highest, you get degradation in ride quality, I think. So in terms of ability to soak up the bumps for the suspension to work and move, you either are aired out and the suspension can't move as much, or you're aired up and there's too much air pressure in the suspension to let it absorb. So standard is tuned very nice, very comfortably. And I really like driving it in standard mode, in soft suspension, regen on high, of course, and that's how I drive the vehicle every day. And it's just a wonderful experience to just kind of waft over these bumps. Now, I'm sure you're curious, is it more comfortable than the R1T? The pickup truck should be firmer, right? Well, no, actually, the pickup truck rides better than this by like a measurable difference, I would say. And part of that could be down to the longer wheelbase and just the way that the thing is set up, but I just feel like this almost has a little bit of a bounce to it, and certainly it's tuned a little bit firmer. Now, again, I'm comparing two different wheel options. I've driven R1T many times in the 20-inch all-terrains, but getting out of my truck on the 22s and into this on the 20s, my R1T rides much nicer. And so I've actually found myself, even during this week when we have to go to a shoot or we're just filming both vehicles, I'm getting into my R1T over the R1S for my little commute. So, or if we're just going across town. So for me personally, I'm very much pleased with my R1T and I'm sticking with it. If you go for an R1S, you'll be very pleased with the ride quality, but R1T is slightly better tuned, I think. So very comfortable. You can see the pitch and dive under acceleration, under deceleration. We get up on the front. This is all one pedal, by the way. Smooth deceleration, lifts off at about 2 miles an hour, comes to a complete stop. No jerks, no fuss, just a wonderful experience. She just blew a stop sign and went, sorry, good thing we stopped. So that's really quite nice. And now we need to get to the highlight of the R1S. So I've kind of maybe not been, I guess, the most nice to the R1S up to this point, but truly the steering is the best steering of any electric vehicle on sale. Maybe Taycan is this and Taycan, but we're comparing a almost 7,000 pound SUV to a Porsche Taycan in terms of steering feel, and arguably I actually really prefer the steering in this because it's kind of crazy that we're in an SUV and can do this. Just the ratio in general, you can see very little input needed, but that also means that the on center point isn't that sharp. So like a Tesla Model 3 has a 2-turn lock-to-lock ratio, and I'm using that as an example because a lot of people have an example of that or have an experience with that. If I just come over here, I don't actually know what the lock-to-lock ratio is on this, but I'm just going to explain this. So this is 1 turn, so it's like almost 2.5, maybe close to 3 turns lock-to-lock in the R1S. But what's really interesting is the on-center tip-in is very lax. It's a very premium experience. But when you dig into the steering, it ramps up the ratio, and you really have this experience of, okay, I just want to make a right turn. You only have to put in, you know, about 180 degrees of steering lock, and you're just whoop, 90-degree turn. Really fun steering ratio, but calibrated wonderfully. In terms of turning radius, just to give you an idea, truly insane. Take a look at this. Full turn. No rear steering, by the way. Just an immensely small turning radius here. So very nimble, much more nimble than R1T. Not quite as nimble as the EQS SUV with rear steer, but certainly much more than our Audi e-tron. I would say on par with BMW iX. That also has rear steer. So for off-roading, for nimbleness, really nice to have this shorter wheelbase, this incredible amount of turn. I mean, it's crazy how nimble this thing can be. I find parking it to be very easy. It's got great 360-degree view cameras. It's just a wonderful experience to get in and around town. So to sum up the around town portion, we have wonderful throttle with huge regen, big fan, massive acceleration on tap, but when you do it, it's kind of fun because it's super squishy. You lift up and point towards the sky. The character changes completely when we go into sport mode, by the way, and I'll walk you through the suspension characteristics later on in the video. The steering is wonderful for performance, for off-roading, especially around the city. It's light, it's easy to turn. The steering is the highlight of this entire vehicle, if you had to ask me. Now, in this whole review, I haven't touched the brake pedal until now. Certainly, we're going to when we shred the Canyons, but the brake pedal is okay, not perfect, and we'll get into that. You really don't even need to think about it around town. Certainly, when you hit the brakes, the car slows down, and it's more than acceptable in my opinion. This particular car, I think, had the brake fluid boiled, so the pedal's not representative. At least the pedal in my truck feels a lot better than this, but this is a press car that I'm sure has lived a rough life. And yeah, so there you go. You can fit 7 people in here. We've done a full family review of this. Hopefully that was helpful to you. You have all the space in the world, easy to get in and out. Phone key works wonderfully. It's just I would say, the easiest vehicle to live with every day, on par with Tesla for ease of comfort, great software updates. As a city urban vehicle, I would spec it on the 22s and you'd be looking really cool, all the power you need, and it would just be the ultimate kid hauler. So big fan of the driving dynamics here. You know, it takes a lot to get me this excited about a vehicle, but I just get into any Rivian, my R1T or this, and I'm just like, yep, this is exactly what I want to be driving today. So I'm just here back at Starbucks. I've been circling the area. I'm going to grab my drink. We're then going to hop on the highway. We're going to talk about noise. We're going to talk about driver assistance. Perhaps we'll have a full driver assistance in-depth review coming on this as well, our hogback challenge. They have made some software updates to make it better. I'd like to rerun it. Did really well in that test, by the way. So let's go grab some Starbucks, and I'll see you over on the highway. But around the city, it's nimble. It feels light on its feet, honestly. Just couldn't get a better daily driving experience if you tried. I really like sitting up high. It's the perfect daily driver. Let's talk highway driving, and I'm actually parked just outside of the highway on-ramp because I want to talk drive mode for a second. There's a few different drive modes that you're going to want to be using on the highway. The first, and I would say the most recommended, is the all-purpose drive mode. And all-purpose is the same thing we used in the city. I got to tell you, there's a lot of drive modes, but 99% of the time, as an owner of one of these vehicles, I'm in all-purpose because it's just so comfortable. I mean, you really only want sportiness when you're shredding the canyons, or you want max range on the highway or off-road for off-roading, but most of the time you're just driving around normally. So all-purpose mode. Then you can get to the suspension height suggestions, and there is an auto ride height profile that will lower the vehicle to low on the highway and then raise it back up when you come off an off-ramp so it's more comfortable. And of course, having a lower ride height should increase your range a little bit. Personally, I keep that off in my vehicle. I just want it comfortable all the time. I drive it in standard everywhere. However, a lot of people, if you have like a long highway commute, that will add up over time, and you may want to drop it in low a little bit from time to time. Personally, I like max control. I don't like the car doing anything for me, and so I keep it out of auto ride height. And there's always a great ride height indication here on the screen, so I know exactly where the truck is in its suspension height. So I would suggest all-purpose. You can choose auto ride height if you like, but I think it rides better in standard. Then you can get to the conserve drive mode, and you can see right now we're dropping down. But within conserve, what's nice is you can still run standard ride height. So a lot of times on a long trip, I'll kick it into conserve, but I'll run standard ride height, and so it's just as comfortable. So then you're like, well, what does conserve do? Well, because they're 4 permanent magnet motors on the R1S, there are always flux related losses if you're just cruising down the road. You only really need a small amount of power to maintain highway speed. So conserve mode physically disconnects the rear drive unit from the wheel speed on the rear axle, and it goes front wheel drive. Why did they go front wheel drive instead of rear wheel drive? I don't know. Maybe it's a gear ratio thing. The front motors might be optimized for higher speed, where the rear ratio might be optimized for off the line acceleration. Just a theory. Again, I'm not sure what the ratios are. Maybe they're buried somewhere. If you know, comment below. I think it'd be interesting to know. But ultimately, you can run front wheel drive, and it's totally fine. Now, driving around in conserve mode, around town at least, is pretty funny, because then you're just left with a front wheel drive R1T, and it's like 400 horsepower front wheel drive, so a little bit of torque steer, not much power. It really smooths in, but it's not meant to be driven like that. So certainly you can throw it in conserve mode on the highway, and you can go from standard, low, or lowest in conserve mode. Sport mode and conserve mode both open up that lowest suspension height. It rides like crap in lowest. It's just like, don't use that unless you have to stretch it to the next station and you're really trying to get there. Otherwise, jack this thing up and have a comfortable ride. That's my suggestion. Very rarely do I use lowest on my personal truck. Just kills the ride comfort. And you know, occasionally if I'm like, oh, I might not make it to the charger, I'll drop it down and drive a little bit slower. That's how you extend your range. So let's go all-purpose normal mode to start. I am going to throw it in conserve mode briefly. We're raising up now, and let's see, it's on its way up. Still hasn't made it there because it's flashing. Now we have arrived. So let's go get onto the highway. I love the squishy mode. First of all, it just pitches up on the throttle, dives down under braking. Things are flying around. Not much body lean though, and we'll talk about that in the canyons. That this crazy suspension allows for really changes in body roll behavior. So merging up onto the highway here, plenty of power on top. By the way, I believe Rivian does limit power output in all-purpose mode at higher suspension. At lower suspension, it seems to be a bit quicker. Could be just, of course, some loss of torque from raising the suspension up. That's, of course, some inefficiencies, but or I should say some parasitic loss. But yeah, I think in sport mode they give it a little bit more power. It's better on the half shafts. Speaking of the half shafts, all quad motor Rivians have this problem where they get clunky when you drive it hard, and I've noticed this truck has started to get a little bit clunky, and I've documented that problem on my personal channel with my Rivian R1T. It's called Kyle Connor, but yeah, you can bring it into Rivian, they'll tighten up the half shafts again, but basically the shaft is clunking on the teeth, and you got to re-tighten them up, and it's not like a dangerous problem, it's just you hear some clunks every time you accelerate or decelerate and the half shaft changes its position, and it's so frustrating, especially where the rest of the drivetrain's so quiet and refined, then you just get clunk, 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 clunk. So, merging onto the highway, let's just full send it on, why not? So, great placement of the vehicle here. A little bit of brakes because there's a little bit of traffic. You can get right up to highway speed. What is this thing like? Low 3-second 0 to 60 range, something like that. Just insane acceleration. So easy to merge. When we're on the highway, the first thing is that I notice is just how quiet it is. I mean, this is not a quiet section of pavement that we're on right here, and this thing rocks in terms of NVH. It's comfortable, it's quiet, and there's like nothing annoying. Now you've noticed I put it on driver assist. I'll talk about that here in a second as well. But the noise levels on the highway are great. Now, even better than with the 20-inch wheel and tire package would be to go for the 21 or 22. It would even be slightly quieter then. I am just so impressed with the quietness. Now, you do get a little bit of wind noise coming from up top. It's a tall vehicle. There's a body clamp there, but really nice. I've noticed a lot of early Rivians had issues with the A-pillar window leaking. This vehicle, rock solid. The only time I've heard like real loud wind noise is with like a 40-mile-an-hour crosswind, and you just can't do anything about that. It's pretty amazing. So we have two trucks doing a drag race in front of us here, unfortunately, and nothing we can do about that. But let's talk about ride comfort, since to me this is probably the most important distinction between R1T and R1S. R1T, the truck, longer wheelbase, unbelievably comfortable on the highway. It wafts. It does this nice floaty thing. It feels so premium. It's almost got a Rolls-Royce-like level of ride quality to it. Not quite, but almost there. You feel the weight. Just feels like you're flattening bumps. This probably has the same suspension tuning. I definitely get it on the front axle, but with the rear axle being just that much closer, I can tell, okay, we're getting a little bit of bounce on this thing. It's not bad at all. It's still very controlled. Our Audi e-tron, by the way, is much bouncier than this, and I would still consider that to ride wonderfully. But just natural things happen when you shorten a wheelbase, and it's not as refined as the R1T. What are these two trucks doing? They're like both at their speed limiter, and no one's passing anyone. So now this guy's backing off and ducking into the right lane. We're on very loud concrete at 60 miles an hour, roughly, quiet. Passing power, just to give you an idea, foot down, no problem. You can just blow past everyone. Now we have allegedly just hit our top speed right there, which is the same as R1T. And I use the word allegedly, of course, because we would never do that in real life, of course, but it's the same 112 kilometers per hour indicated as the truck. So I think, personally, maybe not on these 20-inch tires, but at least on the 21s or 22s, I think this thing should have 130 mile an hour top speed. Now, is that nitpicking? No, but when they branch into the Euro market, I mean, even out here, like I'm running into the speed limiter from time to time, driving like an idiot. I don't know. I just wish it had the truck's stable enough to have a higher top speed. It would kill range, but let's go for that. So, okay, let's talk driver assistance. So the suspension is really good, great road tripper, no question. When I put it on driver assistance, it works the same as Tesla Autopilot, if you're familiar. The first click locks in the speed. And most of the time, at least in my area, I only get adaptive cruise control because the lane centering function, Driver Plus, requires a pre-mapped highway, similar to GM Super Cruise or Ford hands-free eye-tracking Blue Cruise. Now, Rivian has a little eye-tracking component up here, which I cover up from time to time, because I don't know if they're spying on me or not. I'm joking, but I just happened to see if this would stick, and it did. there is an eye tracker or facial tracking here. I don't believe it's used for anything at the moment, but perhaps they'll unlock that in the future. So at least after a few software updates, lane centering has gotten good, but it's not great. So I have had a couple phantom braking, and especially if you're in the right lane on lane centering, it sometimes likes to take exits, but it freaks out. It goes red, it doesn't know what to do. It says, please take over, then you take over, and then there's about a 30-second delay before it lets you re-engage the system. And honestly, for long trips, I think this is more than fine. If you're spending most of your time on highways, going across the country, if you're on I-95, I-70, I-5, you know, any of the major highways, they're all pretty much mapped. Here I am on I-25 heading into Wyoming. It's mapped all the way into Wyoming through Nebraska, no problem. Really good. The other thing I really like about this system actually is the steering wheel is capacitive instead of a torque wheel. So you just have to lightly touch the wheel somewhere to tell it you're paying attention. I find a torque input to be dangerous from time to time. There's pros and cons, of course, but I'm actually a fan of a capacitive wheel. Now, if you notice that lane change, the vehicle does not yet currently support auto lane change. And I say not yet currently because I believe it's going to come in an over-the-air update at some point. I don't know. No one's ever told me this, but I don't see why not. So all you have to do is hit the turn signal. The steering becomes very easy to break away. You complete your lane change. And once you're centered, then you get the Driver Plus is available to be re-engaged, and you can double click and you're back on and you're good. One thing I actually prefer about autopilot to this is autopilot lets you engage the system on your way over to the center. So for example, if I'm in my Model S, I can re-engage autopilot about here, and then it just locks me in the center. Here I have to wait, and now I can put it on. So, you know, just little things, but these are the things you notice over time on a road trip. You're like, oh, let me center it and then kick it back on. But if you're staying in your lane for the most part, it's totally fine, very acceptable. One thing I think is weird is you can't change the drive mode when you're in driver assistance. So I'm going to pull it out of driver assistance, put us into conserve mode, and drop us to the lowest ride height setting. And you'll just instantly see firmer, even though I still have the ride in soft, and very bouncy. Early R1T software, the trucks actually rode better if you put it in stiff ride because you weren't hitting the bump stops all the time. I'm pretty sure Rivian engineers either upped the air pressure a little bit or just raised it a ½ an inch in lowest, so that soft is, I would say, acceptable now to run in lowest ride height. But look, I just did 300 and something miles yesterday going up and down highways. I did the range test. I ran errands in this, over 300 miles in one day cruising on highways, and just not an issue at all. Would have no issues driving this across the country. It's certainly not as refined as our e-tron in terms of noise comfort. It's certainly not as refined as the BMW iX or any of these things, but I would say it's more than acceptable. It smokes a Tesla Model X in terms of ride comfort, in terms of noise. It's just a more than acceptable highway cruiser, and I would say it's great. Now, if you're buying this as a road tripping device, we need to talk about charging. This charges the same as the Rivian R1T. I just did some tests last night. I'm not going to make a whole video on it. But it's very important, this relationship between charging curve and how far you can go after that. And that's the most important metric. And maybe I'll find a way one day to quantify this. But this vehicle charges at above 200 kilowatts, basically from 0 to 40–50% state of charge. However, it does have battery cooling issues. When you do these deep, high-power chargers at 500 amp capable chargers, again, it's a 400 volt class of vehicle, needs 500 amps to get 200 plus kilowatts. It's actually peak of 450 volts on this pack, so I like it because it's a high 400 volt. And we're not actually turning left here, sorry. We're turning left at the next one because I got to take a thumbnail at the charger, which I forgot to do for our range test yesterday. I've seen a peak of 221 kilowatts delivered, and the problem is when you do these deep charges, my friend Brendan Flash actually put out a video about charging on a 150 versus a 350 kilowatt charger, and a few different variations in there as well. The trucks all kind of charge at the same time, so using a 350 kilowatt charger really only helps you for that short time you're at the peak, but then you hit a thermal limit and it dies. Now you would think, okay, can they optimize the cooling with software? Well, certainly they can do what they can with the hardware component that's in the vehicle, but their cooling plates don't touch every bit of the battery pack. So my guess is there's a certain section of the pack that gets hot, you know, too hot, hits its limit, and you're only as strong as your weakest link. And so I'm thinking, yeah, I'm thinking that there is an issue here with the thermal performance of the vehicle when you're, yeah, when you're charging it, and there's nothing they can do about it, unfortunately. That's my guess, at least. Actually, I canceled kneel mode there because normally I don't let it drop all the way because I hate hearing the air compressor kick on, but I actually want it to kneel. So we're going to come in again. I don't know if that was fast enough. Sometimes you have to go above 5 miles an hour. Yep, have to go above 5, so it's not going to kneel, which is okay. I can just drop it in conserve mode for the thumbnail into neutral, and I'll let it rest. So yeah, worry about this cooling issue now. Has it been that much of an impact on our ownership experience? Towing, take a look at our out of spec motoring channel. We've done a lot with this drivetrain and battery pack. Towing in hot weather and cold weather, you'll see these issues pop up. It's not that big of a deal, but certainly something to note is like, okay, could use some thermal ability, thermal longevity in the battery pack. So there you go. On the highway, no issues with a long distance cruiser. It charges fine enough for your road trips. I still think the navigation needs better route planning. It needs some things. The battery does precondition on the way to a charger. I would only actually do that if the battery pack is really cold. I'm finding the more it preconditions, the quicker it derates from thermal issues. So that's just my recommendation. Unless the battery's frozen, don't precondition it. Just select something right next to the charger. So I think the weakest part, at least in terms of software, and this is a driving review though, is the route planning. Needs some work here. But cruising on the highway, it's quiet, it rides nice, and compared to EQS or iX or e-tron, it's not as refined on the highway portion. Certainly no massaging seats. The sound system is actually not as good as the R1T. I think it's the same sound system, maybe a couple more speakers, but like a bigger cab. So you kind of lose the punch that you get out of the R1T from at least the low end. But it's a great system. Meridian did a nice job on this. It's just not nowhere near what the Germans are putting in their cars with the Burmisters, the Bowers and Wilkins, and the Bang & Olufsens. Those are certainly a step up from what's in here. So if you like to jam out on the highway, maybe consider one of those. But if you certainly want a vehicle that can do the capabilities of this, there's nothing else that can come close to how this drives on the highway and then go as hard as it can in the canyons and go as crazy as it can off-road. It's just the spider web of capability is insane, does everything really well. I'm going to take the thumbnail, going to drive us over to some good roads, and then we're going to do the most important part of this test, which is shredding it up a canyon. We are on our way to the start of the canyons, and I thought, okay, maybe I should talk a little bit about how the suspension works and just the motor stuff before, so you have an idea of what I'm talking about when we go up in the canyons. And first of all, can I just say I've now been in the car for a couple hours this morning filming, and I've been driving it every day for the last 7 days, putting 1,000 miles plus on this thing, really just driving it. I love the R1S. I think this is like the ultimate SUV. I don't know what else you'd buy. Of course you can, if you're looking for ultimate luxury, you can have that. If you're looking for ultimate outright speed, you're going Model X Plaid. I mean, if you're looking for something to do better in one category, there are options out there. But I don't think there's anything that comes close to the spider web of capabilities as to what this can do. It can go off-road pretty amazingly. It can go around a track pretty well. All of these things. So just the breadth of capability is what I love so much. And the fact that the cruising, the around town, the steering, the way everything's light and easy to operate, and it's approachable for many people of different driving skill levels, to me that is a huge plus. And yeah, couldn't ask for anything better. Every engineering decision is a compromise, and I think they made almost all of the right ones here. But I did say almost. So let's talk about suspension before we get into anything. The suspension is comprised of a few different components. The first is an air component. You have air, active damper, and active roll stiffness. So the air component is 4 air springs, if you will, fed by a single compressor in the back with an air holding tank. That air holding tank, like I've mentioned a few times, I don't think is high enough capacity because the compressor is constantly having to run and run and run. And Rivians in general have the most overactive air compressor of any vehicle I've driven. And you know, I've spent a lot of times with every generation of Land Rover since air suspension was introduced. I'm not going to say they're the most reliable, but at least they don't annoy you like this does, where that compressor is always running. I also worry about the longevity. Rivian just recently sent a software update that said it stopped the warning about the air compressor overheating and locking out its function. It said false warnings, but I'm pretty sure they just raised the temperature limits to something higher than they originally spec'd, which in theory would reduce the longevity of the component. So I don't really know what's going on there, but I will say, like, out of warranty, my biggest concern about my truck is the suspension complexity, you know, as these things age. They might be wonderful, we'll have to keep an eye on it, but I think my gut feeling tells me, okay, this is going to be, you know, probably something to keep our eyes on for time to come. So that's the air component. Can raise up and down all the way from about 9.5 inches to 15 inches of ground clearance. To me, it looks like it goes way higher than R1T. Your off-road breakover angle is much better than R1T because of the shorter wheelbase. And again, we showed all of that in our out-of-spec overlanding video. The next component is your active damper, and each drive mode, from all-purpose, sport, conserve, off-road, and towing, they all seem to have different damper settings, which I like. So there's many different ways that they're configuring the damper here, and they have a soft and stiff setting for each mode. And so I prefer every day to drive the truck in soft mode because it's just comfortable and floaty and works really well. And then you have, you know, that's pretty common. A lot of cars have those two components. But then you have the magic, the secret sauce, if you will, that goes right on top. And that is a hydraulic roll stiffness with infinite variability. So as you go into a corner, it's actually pushing pressure on the outside of the car to stiffen it up and keep you level. And this is totally variable. So essentially you don't have any metal sway bars on this vehicle. You have braided stainless lines, at least at the end, and then metal lines that go across car. And then you have a compression to rebound and rebound to compression with a pump in the middle that can basically go full pressure or no pressure. So when you're off-roading, you get huge articulation similar to a sway bar disconnect, all the way down to just insane, you know, insane stiffness, which I'm going to show you here. So let's talk about launching the R1S and the different ways and the different modes you can do it. The first thing, I'm going to do probably 3 launches here. The first thing I want to do is show you all-purpose standard, just nailing it from a stop. So no one's behind us, so we're in auto hold. I'm just going to mat the throttle in normal mode. Ready? A little delay, a little clunk on the front end, gives you full power by the time you get to about 50 miles an hour. You can see we lifted up and came down. That's pretty fun, but it does feel a bit abusive on the half shafts, a bit abusive on that front mount because the suspension's so high. There is something I don't recommend doing, only because I don't think it's what it's built for, but there's a soft sand mode. And soft sand is like the secret hack to like laying rubber in this thing. And a couple of forum members mentioned this to me. I'm going to put the suspension in standard, which is the lowest you can go. And I'm just going to nail it from a start in this soft sand function. So let's see. I think it should spin the tires. Just roasting different tires. You can see I had to do a lot of work on the wheel because as one spun, there's no locking diff. It's then applying pressure to the other side, and it's just really trying to figure out what the heck is going on. It's like, why are you on pavement doing this to me? But I do think that's really fun, just if you are like, don't do it leaving a car show because it does upset the balance of the car. So don't do that in front of people, but if you just want to like have a little play, that's kind of funny. Then there's the proper way to launch this thing, which is the hidden launch control function, if you will. And I'm going into sport mode with stiff ride in lowest suspension and stability in reduced. And my understanding is this is the fastest way to launch it. And the way to do it is to go left foot hard on the brake, floor it with the right foot. You can hear some more of those air suspension, but we've leveled out. So I got both feet in. I'm going to pop off the brakes, and this should just catapult us forwards. It's crazy. And it gives so much more power when you do it that way as well. Just, whoa. So those are the different ways of launching the R1S. The fastest way to do it is left foot on the brake, floor it with the right, pop off the brake in sport mode. You can also do that in all purpose, but again, I really worry about that front mount point in that high suspension. That you can tell it's not really adapted for that type of abuse, if you will. I'm gonna pull over here because before we start dialing up the modes, there are some roads I actually want to try on this. I want to talk just a little bit about the all-purpose standard setting, which is the one I mentioned I drive in most of the time. And the reason I bring this up is because I was actually driving my R1T back from our off-roading shoot the other day, and I just had it in standard mode, and I was coming down one of the canyon roads, and I'm like, wow, this is really nice, not even in sporty mode. So everything's in how I drive it around the city, soft suspension, but you can see not much body lean here because of that active component. You do get dive forward and back because there's no hydraulic component to control pitch and dive other than damper and air, which obviously can't keep up as fast as the hydraulic system can. And of course we're behind a slowpoke, but I just think there is something kind of nice about driving a squishy vehicle and getting a feel of where the weight is going and powering out of corners. And drivetrain control has a lot to do with the different drive modes as well. And while we're stuck behind Mr. Toyota Tundra over here, who's not actually going that slow, he did just get on the throttle there pretty hard. 5.7 liter V8, baby. Of course, he's over the double yellow line. You know, there is something just confidence inspiring about naturally the way this chassis is set up. It's a lot more agile than R1T. It's honestly a lot more agile than EQS SUV and e-tron. iX is pretty spicy up in the canyons, I will say, but I prefer this seating position. I much prefer this steering to any other electric car. Like I mentioned, this is Taycan levels of steering right here. Lucid Air had great steering as well. But that's really impressive for something of this size. So is he gonna pull for us? Yes, he is. What a guy. Thank you so much. We're just gonna accelerate past. We're gonna go hazards as a thank you. And yeah, let's just drive it in squishy mode for a bit. We'll shred it later on in the road, but very flat. The one thing that is weird is coming in under braking, you do get this dive on the front axle, but look at this, consistent steering input. I do have to put a bit in because it's not a constant radius corner. A little bit of power out, nice smooth motions here. It's very happy with that. And then of course you can unleash the power and just go big speeds if you want to. You do need to be mindful of braking. It's a heavy vehicle, of course. Just a little bit of outside front tire howling away there. But look at this, coming in under more power. I give it, I'm floored right now. It's not giving us power. As I unwind the steering, very smoothly gives us power. There's been so many cars we've driven with traction control that are just like, nope, you're locked down, and as soon as you reach a certain steering threshold, it just gives you everything. I'm looking at you, Tesla, and a few others actually. I think BMW is like that as well. And for this to just have a really nice, smooth traction control activation, it's not even getting into ESP, it's just holding you back on probably a G limit or tire grip limit. Really, really, really nice. And honestly, I kind of like, if I lived up in the canyons, for example, I would just keep it in all-purpose squishy mode and just play around with this thing in this mode. You can kind of huck it through if you want, and it gets a move on. It's good in this mode. The motor sounds so good as you accelerate. It's got plenty of power on tap. The one thing it doesn't have is great thermal longevity. If you really drive this thing hard, you toast the inverters. And especially when towing, I should say, going down steep grades here in Colorado with a trailer, you only get a couple miles of a lot of regen before it just cuts you back and you're using friction brakes. So drivetrain thermals, battery pack thermals, I'm not totally impressed with. If you are curious to see that, we actually shot a video on the Rivian R1T versus Porsche Taycan, which is crazy that we did that, but it was great. On a dry lake bed, we just had some fun, and the Rivian kept going into drivetrain overheat, into turtle mode, because we were just a little bit too hard on it. Meanwhile, the Porsche just gave us full power the whole time. So, you know, there's improvements there, of course. But is that the main design task of this? I'm not so sure. But look at this, like, we're getting a tiny bit of tire squeal, especially in this all-purpose setting with the suspension up. It's very understeer biased. There's no risk of it, you know, sort of oversteering on us. It is agile to turn in, but even if I go off throttle and try and rotate it, you can get it to move. And obviously the ESP was delayed there slightly, which is kind of funny to see it just behind what was going on. You can get it to rotate, but it's not like naturally going into a corner gonna oversteer on you. I did that on purpose to get the weight on the front axle and pull the rear around. And the nice thing is it's neutral enough where you can do that. And again, in soft suspension at high ride height, we had a little bit of an oversteering situation. No risk of it rolling the battery packs in the ground. It's a really nice setup here. What I guess we'll do is we'll pull over because of these guys. I'm going to throw it in sport mode, in sort of canyon carving mode, which is what I like to say. So we're going to go sport mode. In the highest ride height you can go in sport, which is low, not lowest, and the ride in soft. I'm also going to go full stability control off because we don't need that kind of negativity in our reviews. And bearing in mind, we're not on track. My plan was to actually put the 22-inch sport wheels on this and go on track, but man, 6 or 7 days with a car gets really tight when you got to film as many videos as we do. So again, wish we had more time with it, but that'll be for another day. Thankfully, a lot of our viewers are getting these things pretty early on. So what I've done again is sport, low, ride in soft, regen in high, stability full off. This is probably the quickest way to get down a rough canyon road. Again, stiff doesn't always mean fast. You want the suspension to work a little bit for you. And because there's such a huge breadth of capability for the suspension system, it's actually kind of nice when you have some compliance, because it gets crazy stiff, especially in lowest suspension. It's almost bouncy. A lot of that is also down to the tires pushing us back up on the all-terrains. The sport wheel and tire package, I think, is the one best suited for the vehicle. I've said that a few times, unless you're going off-road, but this thing's optimized so great for hardcore shredding. So let's go just send it through these corners a little bit and see how it does in, I would say, fast canyon mode. Big power. As I apply more throttle, this is where we start reaching the limits of the 4-motor system. And that would be, as I'm coming out of this corner, full power. It's actually understeering a little bit at full power, as you would expect, every car should. But what I'm really wanting is to throttle steer the vehicle, and it's not allowing me. And what's happening is the inside rear wheel is actually spinning up, and I'm not getting all the power to the outside. So this is the same problem we noticed with the 4-motor system when we had the R1T out on the dry lake bed. I notice it all the time when I drive it hard. It's like, okay, I'm giving it full beans. Now let it rotate on power, please. And what's happening is that motor's reached maximum power output. This one's wasting power exiting. If we had a limited slip diff or a locking diff, I could then transfer that extra power to the outside wheel and get the thing to pivot and go. It does it on dirt because there's enough power on that motor to spin the outside tire on dirt, and it's really fun on dirt. You can really huck this thing around and do big skids, and I've shown that in our overlanding video. But on pavement, I just wish we could lock the diffs for like everything. Just the drivetrain is set up really well. I just want to take the extra power that's being wasted, sent on top of the existing motor to sort of multiply the power. And unfortunately, you just can't. So as a hardcore shredder at high speed driving, if you're talking about like, let's set some lap times and you don't really want to pivot the car and you just want natural mechanical grip, look at this, coming up through here, full send. I mean, that was right into the speed limiter. And it just is insane how fast this thing is, how naturally balanced it is. It's a hardcore machine, no question, you know, if you're using that. And so, you know, in terms of lap times, I actually bet this would be pretty good. Now, are you going to take your R1S to the track? I know a friend of mine did, which was pretty cool. And I might, if I can find the video, I'll link to it because he had it on Shenandoah. It was pretty awesome. But overall, I would say, okay, for tight canyon roads, better drivetrain optimization. For high-speed track usage, fine, but you do, again, run into those thermal limits, so it's not totally optimized. The next thing I think we should probably discuss is braking. So this is full regen and regen in high. Regen, again, if you're driving it hard on a canyon or on a track, I would actually turn it down because all that's doing is spiking more heat into the system. Of course, you're recapturing the energy, but it's not as, you know, I'd rather have thermal longevity than energy in the battery pack. So I'm going to go full braking from about 60 miles an hour. Here we go. So you can see a lot of not necessarily just dive, but the whole thing hunkers down, which tells me the rear brakes are doing a lot of work, which makes sense because we have a very close 50-50 weight distribution. Also, not a lot of grip on these all-terrains, to be expected, right? And the problem with the all-terrains too, if you drive it really hard like this, you start chunking the sidewalls a little bit. But the brake pedal feel is On this particular one, very squishy, and I think it's because it's probably done some track use or hardcore use and the fluid got hot and it boiled a little bit. Just feels like the pedal's not right in this thing. But when you do get new emergency braking and you get the ABS activation, you can definitely tell emergency braking is like, oh, you're hitting the brakes hard, here's everything. You can feel the ABS pump through the brake pedal. It's a very natural brake pedal, and that's because it's a fully connected brake pedal. It's not a brake by wire, so it feels very reassuring, very nice, and just the noises this thing makes when stopping a 7,000-pound SUV in all terrains. It sounds like a semi-truck. It's hilarious. So it's coming in. So, okay, I think we've pretty much covered the R1, and there's the air compressor again working. Anytime you do something crazy, it tries to level out the suspension. I think we've done a pretty good job of showcasing the R1S in a gentle cruise down a canyon. I'm going to go to another road which is a little bit quieter and very hardcore. I'm going to try and put some of the stuff on the inside, lock it away, and really shred it so we can get an idea of hardcore driving. And yeah, I mean, should I compare it to R1T really quick? In my impression, this is so much more fun than R1T on a back road. R1T is incredibly impressive. What you don't get with R1T, though, is any rear axle movement helping you come around. It's always you've reached the limit of the front axle, no matter what you do with throttle, even getting the weight on the front. Unless you have a lot of room, it doesn't love to rotate. This is so much more rotation happy. Even coming off highway off-ramps, like just off of I-25 when I'm heading home or whatever, I have this awesome little squiggle, and I'll just go sport mode, ESP off, and just kind of chuck it, a little bit of oversteer, send it the other way, and you can do these big weight transfers with this short wheelbase, and it's really fun. It has very rally car style handling, and I love that. So for me, as a handling device, this is the most impressive 7,000-pound handling vehicle I've ever driven. And I'm on 20-inch all-terrains, which also kind of gives it this balloon-like feel, which is kind of fun. But man, I wish I had the 22s on this to do a proper evaluation with higher grip levels. Be pretty impressive, no question. So yeah, let's go shred it hard, and then that'll be probably the end of this very long video. I hope you're enjoying it so far. I'm really loving just driving this. Sitting here driving normally, it's no different from the truck. The view out the front's the same. It's just the same. But anytime you like turn the wheel like this, you're like, whoa, really wants to come around much quicker. It's like kind of eager. It's like a little happy dog. It just wants to rip. It's awesome. Before we shred it, I'm just at one of my favorite dirt roads here, and I thought let's put it in rally mode. And there's also a drift function, which I guess, all right, let's just put it in drift mode to start. And I will show you how you can slide this thing. Just make sure no one's around. Nothing to see here, folks. Just silent skids, okay? So full drift. You can see just very neutral steering, but we had power on oversteer that whole time. So what it's doing on the rear axle is really overdriving that outside motor best it can. It's sending most of the power to the back, and it's really kind of a fun feeling to just be able to, on dirt, just and yeah, it's quite nimble. You don't actually get huge opposite lock in this unless you're really flying and you can use the weight of the thing to move, because again, you do reach the limit of that outside motor. But just coming out of corners like this, you can stab the throttle, oversteer, power out. I really love driving it in drift mode. But rally, I think, is probably the best compromise for fun. So you go rally, full stability off, ride in soft to let it soak up the bumps, and you can see here we're just like clawing for traction through that mud right there. Really great. A couple blind corners, just don't want to go flying through here, but just give you an impression of kind of the fun you can have in this thing. It certainly is a blast to just come through and full send it up here. A little bit of ABS in the corner. You can see throwing it in off throttle gets oversteer. So here we go, off throttle, in, oversteer, just as an impression to give you. Really awesome car to just send around a little bit. Just love every little bit of this. So let's I guess let's just go see what's going on at the towers up here. It's a really cool view vantage point, and then we'll go and shred it. I got to clean off the tires on the pavement anyway because we're right near where the good road starts, but worth it just to have fun in the dirt. This thing loves dirt. I want to take our truck out to some of the soft sand and have some fun, but just awesome up here. Always really cool views. Always spooky at night, actually. If you come up here in the middle of winter at night, it's really bright because all the snow is out. We actually have snow up here now, and you have views of the entire city down below, which is just incredible. I got to get a photo of this thing up here. Really Just absolutely insane views here. So let's get a photo of the R1S up here, and then we'll continue our drive. Time to shred. Go everything in the sportiest settings. Sport mode, ESP off, lowest suspension height. And yeah, let's just make a quick U-turn. And it's struggling for traction. That's where soft suspension would really help with wheel movements to help absorb all of that stuff. But yeah, nice. Even in sport mode, you can tell it really prioritizes rear motor and lets you spin around. So just gonna get out of the way of everyone, and then yeah, got a great road here. One of my favorite testing roads. Don't use this one too often, but it's a wonderful loop. So very tight, very twisty, very technical, and feeling pretty good here. I love the seating position, nice and close to the wheel, which is nice, so I can really work everything. And let's go send it. So full speed in. Braking, brake pedal is soft, of course, like I mentioned. Tightening up, and that's where I want. Limited slip diff, we're keeping it pinned, and look at this, just massive speed you can pile on through here, which is just crazy. And into braking we go. Not going to use all of it. Very smooth power. Again, inside wheels keep spinning up, front and rear, which is a weird feeling, of course, until you start visualizing how a four-motor system works. Coming in, little lift-off oversteer. Feel the weight of the car, of course, but these tires also don't help with response time. So from steering tip-in to actual vehicle movement is a little bit slower than you would get on the 22s, but you know, 22s are definitely optimized a little bit better for this truck. I have it in stiff right now. If it were up to me, I'd actually run this probably in soft and up one suspension height, because over these bumps, it's actually almost like the tires coming off the road a little bit. But look at that transition. That's what the low center of mass will really do for you. It's just kind of whoop, 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 whoop. And it's so balanced and neutral. Feels really great. I'm going to take it out of the lowest suspension and put it to soft. So now I'm back to how I like to drive it. But it is very impressive on a back road. Like, there are very few cars that will probably be able to walk away from this. Honestly, the tires let it down in this case. That's impressive for what an all-terrain tire can do. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure they spent a lot of time honing this tire for this type of driving, which is really crazy impressive. But compared to like a full-on sports tire, you know, this thing, how are we even talking about handling in a 7-passenger electric SUV? I mean, it's just crazy, and it absolutely motors. It's really great. So like, even here, look down the straightaway, motors sound good, just smooth, consistent power all the way up to pretty big speeds. Yeah, I would bleed the fluid on this one though. Rivian, if you're watching this, bleed the fluid before it goes to the next media outlet. It wasn't me. It came to us totally squishy. Yeah, very, very impressed here. So there you have it. I think that kind of ends the driving review of the Rivian R1S. You know, one thing we didn't really touch on in this review is the hardcore off-roading. I made a whole separate video of that, but it is incredibly impressive at that too. So in the city, no question, it's nice and easy. It's the perfect ride height just to get in. You just put it in drive and go. No start button. Phone key reacts instantly. Software boots up wonderfully. And I'm in drive before my butt even hits the seat, and I'm ready to go. To me, that is really nice. I just love that I can get in and instantly move this thing away. In terms of comfort around the city, wow, so good. It's nimble. It's got this very agile feeling to it, even though it's quite a large vehicle, and that shorter wheelbase really does help it just kind of scooch around urban areas. It's quite nice. On the highway, I think this certainly is a step down from R1T in terms of, honestly, even noise. I do get a little bit more noise in the back of this cab when compared to R1T, and that's probably just because that's a shorter cab, so I'm hearing more things go on back there, but really nicely tuned noise. It's quiet. I mean, I'm comparing it to also another quiet electric vehicle, but if I compare it to Model X, Model S, if I compare it to, yeah, probably those, it's quieter than, but I don't think it's quieter than EQS or iX or e-tron. Those are all quieter. But compared to the new Range Rover, this is a much better experience all around. Like, that's the thing for me. I can't imagine buying a new Range Rover right now. And I own a classic Range Rover. I've owned modern Range Rovers as well. So I've always had something like this in the garage, but I couldn't imagine going and buying the new Range Rover when this is on the market. Now, of course, there's a wait list to get this, and that's a whole nother topic of can you even get one. But if you had them parked next to each other, why would you choose the Range Rover over this? You have old school leather in the inside, which just seems like it's going to age poorly. They obviously crack over time. The steering wheels get greasy. This material usage in here is so much nicer. The driving dynamics is so much nicer here. You don't have this lag to go. You know, I tested the inline 6, the Ingenium version of the Range Rover, and I just thought that powertrain was not suited well to that vehicle at all. You want to go for the V8, but then you have twin turbo V8 maintenance. It's a BMW engine. You have you know, so much lag, and I've driven that engine in other vehicles, and it's a fantastic engine, but there's still gear shifting, there's still turbo lag. Here it's foot down and boom, just crazy. And into a corner, a little bit of understeer, big power on the way out. You can see it wants to oversteer, but it runs out of steam. So it's just an incredibly dynamic package on and off-road. I feel like I can be rougher on this than I can a Range Rover. That almost has a sense of need to treat it with delicacy, even though you don't. This is like, yeah, let's go in the trails and bash it into stuff. Like, hell yeah. So big fan of this over its combustion competitor, I would say. Big fan of this over its electric competitors, and really just sold on the whole package. From a performance standpoint, we are talking about something that's pretty capable here. I mean, more capable than it needs to be. And whoever did the steering, I just want to meet that person and be like, wow, that's pretty, this is the best steering ratio, rack, feel. Even through these all-terrain tires, you can get a sense of what's going on. And I own the 22s, so I know what's going on there, and it's just great. So there you have it. R1S rocks. It's so hard to be critical of this thing because it's truly great. Now, is it perfect in any singular category? The answer is no. It is not the fastest thing down a canyon. It is not the best off-roading device on the planet. It is not the most comfortable highway cruiser. It is not the easiest, I guess, to maneuver around the city. That would be a smart car. But considering everything else it can do, there's nothing else that pushes the boundaries like this. It's just truly insane. So thanks so much for watching another Out of Spec Reviews video. I hope this helps you reservation holders get excited about your truck. I'm really sad I have to give it away this evening. Really gonna miss it. Really do love this thing. Really do love this thing. And I'll see you on another episode soon. Bye-bye.